I'm South Shore Press News Director Stefan Mihailu. This is the second episode of the South Shore Press podcast, joined by financial guru John Taylor, sports director Tom Barton, and the dean of South Shore Reporters, Mr. Robert Charda. Guys, how are you?
Good. Bogged down with all the rain here.
Yeah, rain and a Yankees loss, so we're certainly going to get to that. We've got an exciting podcast. Joe Girardi is going to join us on the podcast. So Yankees fans, good, bad, or indifferent, you're feeling good, you're feeling bad. That's going to be a great one you don't want to miss. National politics, sports, we got it all right here. So, guys, I want to start, and John, I do want to start with you because the South Shore Press, yours truly, and Bob Chardick, we spent a few days in and around Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of the Trump assassination attempt last year. And it was such a surreal experience being there, talking to folks in their neck of the woods. So, John, I want to start with you. What are your general thoughts, John, on the shooter itself and the fact that a lot of people that Bob and I spoke to just think there's something a little fishy going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, in the post-Charlie Kirk period, it's been another renewed cycle of conversation, I think, amongst people of just in general government transparency. We probably know more, at least we've been told more about the Charlie Kirk shooter in the weeks after that shooting than we've been told about the guy who shot the president or then candidate for president. And it's just, as I have conversations with my friends, I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but in the era of social media where there's just so much information, it's much easier for people to disbelieve a narrative simply because it fails basic logic. If you rewind the clock 50 years and the public was told something about the JFK assassination, there's just not a lot of counter evidence to disprove the narrative that's being fed to you by the government. And in this day and age, there's just a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of people commenting on things. There's certainly a lot of evidence that gets put forth. There's a lot of citizen journalists out there who are doing their own work. And oftentimes we find ourselves in these situations where the government's stated narrative just simply falls flat on its face. And I think in the Butler case, when the government tells you that the reason they didn't have snipers on the roof is because the roof was too sloped, but then we can see images of the roof and we can see the shooter on the roof and we can see the government workers on the roof after the event took place and it's essentially flat, you just have to ask yourself, well, why? That's clearly a lie. So why are you lying? What is it that you're covering up? I think it's a good idea for journalists, including the South Shore Press, to go ask these questions because of course the public deserves to know what happened there. Who was this kid? Was he working with somebody? Was he paid for somebody? There's a lot of conspiracies out there. And I think much as, I think the longstanding damage of the COVID dynamic, for example, is that when the government offers us a narrative that is clearly false, not only is it just irritating to the public that, oh, you're lying to us, it does real damage to these institutions that the public relies upon for basic life. How many people do you know who don't trust what they're being told by their doctors today because they believe that they were lied to under COVID? That's real damage to our country and to our culture. So when we have a situation like Butler where there are people saying that this guy was working with the CIA and the government has offered me no evidence to counter that argument, that's real damage to our country and our national security and the intelligence apparatus that I hope was not involved with that. But we need to be asking those questions.
And Bob, you asked a lot of those questions of people living in and around Butler. You spent a couple of days there, Bob. Is that the vibe or feeling that you got from the people that talked to the South Shore Press of maybe the kid acted alone, maybe he didn't? You saw and were there and saw the roof where the assassin was. What's the vibe or feeling you're getting on those points from the people in and around Butler?
What I found was the incident was still pretty much fresh on the minds of the residents of Butler. We had the opportunity to speak with one of the directors of the fairgrounds where the incident took place. And he said right from the get-go that 2 weeks prior, when the Secret Service and the FBI were setting up, he felt it was very fishy. And he told us that he actually remarked to his wife that he was afraid something was going to happen. And as we know, something did. They're not trusting what they're hearing from the government. Other people I spoke to, one was actually at the site. He had a very compelling story. He was about 30 feet from the president. And he told me that when the bullets started flying, he hit the deck. And later on, he was a hunter. And he said anybody could have made that shot. Stefan, you and I were there, and we saw that sloped roof. And one thing that really jumps out at you is how close it is to where the president was standing. And the citizens there and the residents, almost to a person, were like, we can't believe that this young man got on that roof carrying a ladder and a rifle, and he wasn't stopped. And then the point of people were pointing him out to law enforcement, to the Secret Service, saying, there's somebody on the roof, there's somebody on the roof. And they didn't do anything about it. So the people there are still very skeptical and very aware that something may be being withheld from the residents of Butler.
Yeah, it was shocking because being there, guys, the photographs you see on social media, the video you see on so-called mainstream media, it does it no justice at exactly how close this assassin was to President Trump. Until you're actually standing there physically, it hit me like this light bulb went off, like, my God, how does this kid get so close to the commander-in-chief, getting a ladder? And now there are multiple buildings where he was kind of like jumping around, and then finally where he took the shots that tragically killed the firefighter and almost killed our president. But you don't really, for lack of a better phrase, appreciate just how close he was until you're walking around that field. And that was one of the feelings that I got, Bob, was like, I cannot believe this kid got off one shot at President Trump without being noticed, without being stopped, or multiple ones. I mean, Tom, any thoughts? Because I know obviously you're a sports guy, but you've got pretty strong political feelings. I mean, what are your thoughts, Tom, pertaining to Butler, Pennsylvania, and this case?
I mean, it's all BS. It's kind of like John said. Look, we'll just cut right to it. You know what I mean? They're clearly lying. Who's to benefit? We don't know, but they're clearly lying. And you know, I go back to, I used to spend a lot of time in Las Vegas, and in the early 2000s, we talked to a director of security there. And he was telling us, this is in the early 2000s, that when somebody walks into a casino, they had the ability at the time, to go into their pocket, and they could probably see what kind of mint they had in their pocket, is kind of how he explained it to us. And he said, and the scary thing is that the government is probably 20 years beyond us, right? So now take that 25 years later. Are you telling me that at Donald Trump's, speech that was suddenly, televised by all the networks, right, that they couldn't have known something was going on? They couldn't have seen him before time. They didn't have the technology to quickly figure out what was going on. Come on. There's a matter of, you make a lie so ridiculous that people start to believe it. And it's that. With this case, it's that. The lie is so ridiculous that this lone guy had a ladder, got so close to Trump, shot him just on the day that all of the networks happened to be broadcasting. I mean, look, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to put two and two together, right?
And you guys have seen the site. So, I mean, is it the Secret Service had elevated snipers? Is it plausible in your mind that nobody could see this guy sitting, on a roof with a gun that close?
No way. I mean, Bob, you can chime in as well, but again, it is just shocking at how truly close this kid got to. And when Bob and I were there that day in Butler, we spent a few days in Pennsylvania, actually, and we were just walking around that Farm Bureau fairgrounds. There was a toy fair going on in one of the buildings. It was right next to the place where the assassination took place. And people are coming and going, buzzing around. I'm looking around, and it was just easy to notice people all over the place. So the only difference, though, is that the actual perimeter itself, where the buildings where the shooter was and where Trump was, there is a huge fence. So technically the buildings where the shooter was outside of the Farm Bureau, but it was literally right next to it. And there is no way, no conceivable way that no one didn't notice this kid.
Well,
it's impossible.
You heard right afterwards, all the people, the crowd said, we saw him up there. Right? We saw him up there. We tried to tell people. I mean, come on.
I mean, Bob, what are your thoughts? You were there.
We saw the building where the snipers were, and they were actually closer to the sniper than the sniper was to the president. They were right there. And the word we're getting from some of the residents was that the people were pointing it out, and somebody communicated to the law enforcement, don't do anything. So it was held back for a while. They knew he was up there. Nobody did anything. Somebody issued an order to stand down, and they only acted until the kids started shooting. And one thing that was interesting, Stefan, if you remember, there's still holes in the Farm Bureau building where the shots came through. And the Farm Bureau board member pointed that out. And they're still pretty amazed that this happened, that this shooter got so close and nobody acted to stop him.
So somebody suggested to you guys that that they alerted people to his existence and someone ordered a stand down.
Yes, that's the word we got from some of the residents. Stefan, you spoke to the sheriff. Did he corroborate that?
Yeah, the sheriff had the mindset of, basically that the snipers were heroes because they, from his perspective, it was Sheriff Mike Sloop, where the young man got off one clean shot at President Trump, and then Secret Service and others engaged in the kid, and that distracted him to the point where he couldn't get off a second clean shot. But I think when it comes to the sheriff and a few other people that we talked to had said, look, there's two extremes of thought process of people down there. It was, number one, this kid acted alone, and it was just the biggest security breakdown in the history of the Secret Service and the history of the American presidency. Or a lot of the more like individuals that we talked to, folks that just live around there. Dan, one guy, he owned a butcher shop. A lot of folks were just thinking, look, there's no way this kid acted alone. Officially the sheriff had said, look, a lot of these cops are heroes for the fact that they stopped him from getting off a second clean shot. Folks down there think there's no way this kid acted alone. But I think those were the two extremes that we experienced in Butler. It was, yeah, this kid is just a crazy crackpot. He acted alone, and it was just a huge mess and a bungling of security, or there's something a lot deeper going on.
Yeah, I mean, but you put this in a basket of things where you wonder to yourself, is the truth so bad and so scary that no one will ever tell you the answer? And look, when President Trump was reelected several months ago, you would have thought that there were several kind of buckets of storylines that we might finally get answers. During the campaign, he talked about the JFK assassination, Epstein, of course, a big one. You throw UFOs in that category, perhaps, but certainly Butler. President Trump was the intended victim. You would think that if anybody were incented to disclose the information and the motives behind the guy who tried to kill President Trump, it would be President Trump. And you would think that he has the power and the wherewithal to get the answers to those questions. So I'm assuming President Trump has asked these questions and has gotten the answers to them, but has not told the public. And what are the hypothetical explanations for why President Trump wouldn't want to disclose the answers to these questions on his own assassin? And the only hypothetical answers are the terrifying ones, I guess, right? It's that our own intel apparatus or an ally of ours was involved with that and would just be too damaging to our national security to reveal that information. It's really the only hypothetical. I don't know what another hypothetical would be.
It was really interesting, too. There was such a contrast in the reception that Bob and I got as journalists in Bethel Park, where the accused assassin is from, and then in Butler, PA, where the shooting itself took place. And Bob, you can chime in on this too. In Bethel Park, Bob and I we went to the assassin's home. We approached numerous times, more than once, rang the ring doorbell, talked to neighbors. No one, for the most part, wanted to talk to us down there. Nobody. Although we did talk to a few neighbors on the record, including one neighbor directly across the street who had said that the assassin's parents, they said the mom was blind, the dad also had a physical handicap, and that for those reasons, they never went outside, never associated with anyone. And then when Bob and I were in Butler, and also too in the suburbs and townships around there, people were shockingly incredibly welcoming and open, honest, and transparent, and trying to talk to us. And they were saying, hey, you need this interview, you need to talk to this person, you need to talk to that person. Bob, did you get that kind of vibe that people in Butler were very accommodating and open, honest, and transparent? And then completely did not want to talk. And we even went to the gun range where the young man was supposedly a member. Bob and I drove 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh to the specific gun range, and we talked to the gun range owner, and they wanted nothing to do with us.
Yes, the people of Butler were very accommodating. Stefan and I went to the racetrack that Corey Comparatori, he was the gentleman that was killed. He was a fireman, local fireman. Everybody knew and loved him. He had a big role at the racetrack as far as safety. He did the training for the emergency crews at this racetrack. And when we told them what we were doing, that we were writing a story about Butler and Corey in memory of Corey, they were very accommodating. I couldn't believe it. I kept remarking to Stefan. They drove us around on a golf cart. They gave us pit passes. We went into the pit. We met a lot of people who knew them. They brought us up into the press box. They fed us, gave us food and drink. And to a person, they were very laudatory about Corey Comparatori and what he meant to the community. They did a ceremony for him there at the track. And then to contrast that, like Stefan said, with the people of Bethel Park, where the shooter was from, they were a little more hesitant to speak to us. Although we did speak to some of the neighbors. I got one across the street who was very talkative, and it's the same story. The family was very reclusive. They never saw them. This gentleman said he lived there for 6 years and actually never saw the family. And, they all have theories. And we spoke about, how does this kid from this neighborhood, you look around at the neighborhood and you say, there's no way a shooter could have come from this. It was, modest homes, brick, all the yards were very well taken care of. How did the forces of the world enter this young man's mind to motivate him to do what he did? And they blame the internet. They say that, he goes online, whether it's the dark web or even, public websites where you can go, as I guess a wayward young man and get brainwashed into the point where you're going to go take a shot at the president of the United States. And these residents were, very attuned to, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And, some of them did blame it on the education system. Is there radicalization in the schools? Have the schools become so woke that this type of violence against a political opponent is kind of acceptable? And they certainly voiced that opinion.
What was the stated reason why the folks in Bethel Park didn't want to speak to you?
They see it as a black mark on the community. They don't want to be famous for what happened. So a lot of people we approached were like, no comment. They knew why we were there. The second we said, yeah, we're some reporters, we wanted to no comment. They didn't want to talk to us. But we did get a few. And Stefan actually interviewed a gentleman right on his front porch. And although they didn't know them personally, they certainly had some opinions about it.
Yeah, we went to the one neighbor directly to the house right next door. And she did not want to go on the record, did not want to go on camera, but she basically said that for like days, the entire neighborhood was vacated. Media was there. Police was there. It was hit or miss in Bethel Park. Like basically, again, folks were saying no one ever saw the young man, never saw the parents out. And again, folks in the neighborhood blame that on the parents' disabilities. That's the reason why they never left the house. But it was just a huge contrast in the reception that we got compared from Butler, where people were open, honest, transparent, talked to us till the day is long. Whereas Bob and I we knocked on so many doors in the neighborhood. We were about 4 people we were talking to on the record about the family and about the young man.
And remind me, how old was this kid? The shooter?
He was in the early 20s. He was college aged. He had quite a interesting background. As Stefan and I researched him, he got a 15, almost a perfect score on his SAT. He had scholarships to 2 local colleges, and we didn't interview the parents, but they were interviewed in some of the press clippings at the time that we read. And the father said that he started to lose his son. His son started getting, a little bit crazy. He would dance around in his room, and he started to become unstable. And
And he finished college or he dropped out? What's his deal?
He didn't get to go. I mean, this happened. He was
He was early 20s, but what did he do from 18 to 20s?
well. He worked at a local nursing home, which we also visited. Rightfully, they were like, no, no comment, no comment. So apparently, he was in high school. Some reports said he was bullied in high school. Some people, I actually interviewed somebody who said, no, no, he wasn't. We don't think he was. From what I gather, he's sort of like an outcast. Went home from school. Went up into his room. Went online. God knows what he was seeing online. He did have the wherewithal to get a job at a nursing home, and whatever it was that got into this young man's head, motivated him to do what he did.
Hey guys, let me ask you a question. Why do you think that this is not a bigger deal? And when I say that, I mean we know the names usually of assassins or attempted assassins. We know their background story. There's documentaries on Netflix about this and that, about everything. Everybody wants to know everyone's business. Somehow this kid got swept under the rug. Somehow we don't know everything about this. Somehow when you talk about President Trump and you go through what is going to be his legacy, I don't know how many people are going to bring this up in the top 5 things that he was shot. And it's weird how it's so swept under the rug. Why do you think that is? Is it because it's just failed? Is it because they were able to cover it up and say it was one kid? Or to me, it's shocking that we almost had, a presidential candidate shot on live TV, and it's not a big story every day still to this day.
One thing that popped into my head while you were saying that, Tom, is Trump still has to work with the Secret Service. The Secret Service still has to protect this man. And if you look at it, it was definitely a failure of the Secret Service and the FBI and all these federal agencies. And I think only one person got fired from the Secret Service. Trump may have made some internal official changes of who's in charge of what, but he's still protected by the Secret Service. And to come out and point the fingers and trash them and trash the system that now currently protects him, I don't know. Maybe that's a reason.
Yeah, my closing thought on that one is I think there's the thought process, and again, it was from Sheriff Mike Sloop of, look, his exact words to me were, I trust Dan Bongino, I trust Pam Bondi, I trust those in the FBI, that it was a lone, deranged, crazy kid and just a horrible breakdown in security. That was their thought process.
In closing, Stefan, one thing that was really remarkable, I got 2 of the most different approaches. I actually spoke to a man, a military guy in Butler, and he said, man, if the Secret Service didn't get him, we would have. I wish I could have, been more active. In other words, this guy would have taken action had the Secret Service not. And then I actually got a guy right in Bethel Park that said, I wish his aim was a little better.
And
Referring to
the
sniper. Yeah, right in not even a block from the shooter's house. And he came right out and said, yeah, I wish the shooter's aim was a little better. So there's a real distinct difference between, and it emanates from the cities. So Bethel Park is near Pittsburgh. They're very Democrat, very left-leaning. As you get out into the suburbs, where we went into the park there where the incident occurred, they're very Republican. They're very right-wing. And there's a very distinct difference between the point of view of these people.
Yeah, that was certainly the case. And of course, our Twitter handle is at SSP Newsroom, and then the website is South Shore Press. In the days and weeks ahead, we'll be sharing clips and video clips of that trip. We're going to change gears now to, and John, this one's right up your alley in particular. And I think Bob and Tom and I will try to win this contest if we could. And it's such a beautiful one, to say the least, that the South Shore Press is going to be announcing that there's going to be this incredibly generous and wonderful contest to spread a whole lot of love and to really share random acts of kindness in the South Shore and across Suffolk County. John, do you want to touch base and let our listeners and viewers know exactly what this contest is going to entail in the South Shore Press?
Yeah, so I participate in a Bible study weekly, and for those of you who attend church on the weekends, the last few gospel readings have been from Luke, talking about gratitude and service. And there was a homily a few weeks ago at my church where the priest challenged the congregation to engage in random act of kindness contests within your family. And we've all probably seen the movie Pay It Forward, where the idea is that you engage in a random act of kindness for a stranger, and that person feels touched and therefore is more inclined to be kind to other strangers, and the thing goes exponentially. So my family's been doing that. So I have 3 children, and we've been engaging in this contest internally for the last few weeks. And the idea came to perhaps challenge Suffolk County with a random act of kindness contest in the month of November with a cash prize. And the cash is meant to be a carrot to entice people to participate, but it's a curious and interesting social experiment, because you can imagine any number of outcomes occurring here. But in the best version of those outcomes, you have thousands of people out in the streets of Suffolk County engaging in kind acts for their community, and those people have a ripple effect through the community. And just as we've seen over the last for those of us old enough to remember society before the internet and social media, we can all see the downward spiral effects of people engaging in open hostility to one another on the internet. I think that's been quite damaging to our civilization and culture and society. In the best version of what happens with this, can you create an upward spiral through kindness and love that fundamentally alters the culture in the other direction? So we'll see.
So for the month of November, if you do use the hashtag Suffolk Kindness, and that's SUFFOLK, Suffolk Kindness, or email news@South Shore Press. We want to hear, correct? We want to hear from people legitimately. So Bob and Tom, don't go pretending your loved ones are trapped in a house and you record it and you run in, you pull them out with smoke behind you. None of that, guys. None of that funny business. But John, we want to hear from a lot of these individuals, correct?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, and we'll lay out the kind of the rules of the road in this week's paper, I think, but it's intended to be anonymous, so it shouldn't be for someone and it should be outside the course of normal day-to-day activity. So if you are in the business of seeing a trainer, giving your trainer an extra tip for the work he did would be kind of outside. It would be rather inside the scope of the normal day-to-day. So it's meant to be for a stranger outside the normal course of business. And document it, keep it anonymous, but document it back to the paper. And we will evaluate those, and we're going to have cash prizes. Stefan, what are the cash prizes?
First place is $10,000, $10,000, and second place is $5,000. Third place is $2,500, and then numerous $100 prizes. Again, use the hashtag Suffolk Kindness, and then send in submissions to news@southshorepress.com. Bob and Tom, are the wheels spinning already about what you're going to do in a random act of kindness for folks across the South Shore?
Absolutely. I look forward to writing about the $10,000 winner. I can tell you that.
There's this guy. His name is Tom. He coaches Little League for 8 years. And I don't know if you know how hard that is. Okay? 8 years.
That's random.
That's random.
Tom and Bob, what do you guys think when it comes to just an incredibly generous way to encourage kindness, random acts of kindness across the South Shore? Don't you think, or don't you wish and hope like this could be kind of like the beginning of a great movement, just a legitimate, like kind of like grassroots movement of, let's just try to make Suffolk County, which can have some pretty sharp elbows, especially in the world of politics, just have folks treat each other in a loving and kind way. What do you guys think?
The best part about this contest, and it really is if you fail to win, you still win. Right? I mean, if you fail to win the contest and you don't get the money and you don't get the prize, you still win because you helped somebody and you did something good. And morally, you're doing it, which is good. So you're going to lose this contest and you're still going to win.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it goes along the phrase "get by giving." The more you give, the more you get back, and it actually works. I try to live that way. I have friends that do. You know, it boils down to karma. You know, you're a good person. You do good deeds. You do good things. Good things are going to happen to you. If you're a miserable person and you hate everybody, what do you expect is going to come back to you?
Yeah,
Hey, John.
yeah, and like I said, we've been doing this for a couple of weeks just inside of our family, and you know, what we've said to the kids, and it's true. I mean, we do. It's 2 weeks, so we've been doing on Sunday nights. We have a family meeting, and we talk about many things. But in the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about this, and the winner is the giver, because it is remarkable how good, you know. Again, seeing it as a father in my children, it's amazing how good they feel about themselves doing these sorts of things, irrespective of how it gets received. So, you know, again, I'm curious to see how this goes. I'm not aware of any other entity sponsoring something like this, but you know, were this to go well, you can imagine other media entities around the country doing something like this. So we'll see. Could be a profound thing. I think just on a spiritual, philosophical level, you know, there's a lot in the Bible or in various religions about service being the source of joy. I think a lot of human unhappiness comes from trying to get for yourself, you know, I think the opposite is often true. So, you know, a service mentality, whether it be to your community, to your wife, to your children, is often the most profound source of joy, I think. So we'll see how this goes.
And John, don't you think too, because when it comes to Suffolk County, like people who aren't from there, that don't live there, I mean, their perception of Suffolk County, a very recent one, is the Netflix documentary on public corruption and the serial killer and people going to jail for fraud and corruption. And that's kind of like the mindset of, okay, that's what Suffolk County is. Sharp elbows. I mean, the snake's pit of politics. So is this random act of kindness contest along the lines of, okay, maybe that's what folks think, but you know what, let's change it. Let's do something proactive to share love and to kind of have it just grow and explode out of Suffolk County.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know that I would agree that that's the outside perspective of Suffolk County. Maybe it is. I don't know, but like in my mind, having grown up there, you know, Suffolk County is a pretty good proxy for America. You know, it's a working class group of folks who are trying to raise their families and do the right thing, and you know, we have our share of, you know, Gilgo Beach murderers, and but we also have our share of baseball little league coaches and guys doing great things. I do think so. I think the intention of this is less to do with the perception of Suffolk County and more to do with the actual day-to-day culture of Suffolk County. I do think that we as a culture, not just Suffolk County, but the United States in general, are in a downward spiral. A lot has been said about the divisive nature of politics, but politics is downstream from culture, as has been well documented. So, I think social media and the people's proclivity to be mean and nasty to each other is now in your face every day, and it just slowly erodes everything. But there is a counterbalance to that. So I think selfishness and hate and hostility takes us down one direction, and the opposite is also true if we engage with each other and with kindness and love. So we get what we get. So if we each take the responsibility of doing that, I think the world would be better off. But look, the truth of the matter is we all get lost in our day to day and get busy with what we're doing. We're all trying to take care of our families. So, that hostility is not always ill founded, but it does take a simple act of consciousness to treat the people that we engage with every day with more kindness. Is a thing that's obviously possible if it's front and center in your mind.
Bob, what do you think? You're in the trenches every single day. Is this kind of like a beautiful way of planting this really nice seed in Suffolk County with the hopes that, again, first place is 10 grand, second place is 5 grand, third place is 2,500, just to kind of plant that seed of love and kindness and just watching it bloom and grow and spread out across Suffolk County?
Yeah, I think it's going to snowball once people find out is 10,000 and 5,000 and multiple $100 at stake, I think it's going to go viral, and you're going to have your work cut out fielding all the different emails coming in, people looking to score.
Tom, you got young kids. What do you think? You want to like save me in a burning fire and we'll go halvesies? What do you think?
$10,000 would do a lot for a lot of people. I'm one of those people, right? So yeah, I completely understand. It's kind of funny, we talk all the time, and before I knew about this contest, I was talking to both of my nieces teach religion. My sister teaches religion, and what John is saying a lot about the Bible, and my wife is now reading the Bible to the kids every night for the last year or so. And there's so much that comes out of, like John said, like, you're going to feel better if you do for other people. You just will. It's just human nature. Even if you're not a religious person, you're just going to. And it really is a beautiful thing when you think about what that means and what it is to go about it. Christmas is not that far away. Oh my God. I know. I'm freaking everybody out, but Christmas is not that far away. Are you thinking about the gift that you want? Or are you starting to think about, hey, what am I going to get my wife? What am I going to get my mom? What am I going to get the kids? You're automatically thinking about what you're going to give away because it does make you feel good. So I like a lot of what John touched on, but it's not even a religious thing. I mean, I relate it to a religious aspect because I'm reading, hearing the Bible being read, but it doesn't have to be a religious thing. You're just going to feel so good just trying to do this.
It's interesting you say that too about reading the Bible. And John, you can touch on this a little bit too. I think post Charlie Kirk assassination, there's been a groundswell of people who are turning to faith. And my wife and I go to mass every Sunday. We bring our kids, and she is asking, hey, what's a great app to read the Bible? What's a great, and I listen to Hallow every day. I try to, and I fail miserably at going to daily mass. But we definitely go on Sundays, and this could be something that could really light a spiritual fire under a lot of people, because so many more are turning to faith and turning to the Bible and turning to spirituality post Charlie Kirk. I mean, what are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, as Tom said, I mean, a service mentality, of course, is embedded in the Bible, but you don't need to be a Catholic or a Christian or be a churchgoer of any form to have a service mentality. The church is simply a vehicle for you to, have that ingrained in your mind and make it part of your life. But I mean, it's certainly conceivable that people can adopt that mentality in other ways. I would say, speaking for myself, I was raised Catholic. I did spend a significant part of my life in my 20s and 30s kind of getting away from the church. And when we had children, it was important to my wife and I that the children be raised with God in their lives. And it is, as a consequence of that, become a substantial part of our lives as adults and as parents. And I would say, having gone through that journey personally, irrespective of what you think about what happens after you die or what you think about God, the act of going to church every week and talking about the gospel and having it be part of the conversation inside of your family is a vehicle. It is a process to ingrain some of these concepts in your mind. So just as a practical matter, I think it's a worthwhile thing. And as you mentioned, the Charlie Kirk assassination, at least for the moment, appears to have reinvigorated faith as part of the national conversation. That's undoubtedly positive for our culture, for all the reasons that we've just discussed, that people were more inclined to be kind to one another. That is undoubtedly good. So faith would be one reason to do that. If there are other reasons why people will choose to be kind to one another, I'm open to hearing what those are. Unfortunately, there just aren't many structures in place for people's day-to-day lives where the central focus of that structure is for people to be kind to one another. So, in the absence of another alternative, I choose faith.
There you go. You can't go wrong with that. Again, the hashtag is going to be Suffolk, SUFFOLK, kindness. The email is news@South Shore Press. Let's hear it, folks. Again, first prize, $10,000. Second place, $5,000, and third place, $2,500. Numerous $100 awards. We're going to change gears now when it comes to, we mentioned politics before. We're going to touch back a little bit, but with New York State. And I think Letitia James, there's no one in the country who regrets more a tweet that she put out when President Trump was in hot water with the law of her doing, of course. And her exact tweet was, "No one is above the law." And no one knows that more than Letitia James right now. The New York State Attorney General under indictment for mortgage fraud, basically being accused of the exact same BS crime that she accused President Trump of, where when it comes to getting a better interest rate, not being truthful on applications to her loan. So guys, I'm just curious first and foremost, and John, we'll start with you. Just what was your first reaction when you heard, you got that news alert like all of us, that boom, Letitia James, New York State Attorney General, got indicted?
Look, I'm torn on this stuff because there's a piece of me, and I think one of the things that I believe is true about conservatives is that we are principled and believe in the rule of law and equal justice and the Constitution. And if you believe in that, then of course people should not be targeted politically. With the justice system should not be weaponized, and that part of me says, let's be clear, like Letitia James would not be prosecuted if she weren't Letitia James, had she not gone after the president. That the things she's being accused of, let's just assume for the moment that she's guilty of it. She probably is. It seems like the sort of thing that probably doesn't result in criminal indictment for the average person. These charges are being brought against her because of who she is and what she did to the president. And I think that it's a very slippery slope, of course, for each side to go tit for tat. You've seen this in third world countries over and over. I've seen this in my own investing experience. This is the hallmark of a banana republic, is the competing parties go tit for tat and start arresting each other, and the whole place spirals into oblivion. Next thing you know, you have a debt crisis and the currencies are blowing out and everyone's living in poverty. That's where this goes. So the principled position, let's be clear, the principled position is that you do not do this. That said, it is 100% true that she herself and the Democrats engaged in that very thing. So I think as a country, we have to ask ourselves, what is required is for us all to take a step back and take a deep breath and say, can we all agree to stop? That would be the only way for this sort of shenanigan behavior to end. And I think the president, certainly as a human, I can understand the desire to go after these guys. These people try, we just talked about Butler. I personally think they're all related. They tried to prevent this guy from taking office again because he represents such an existential threat to the establishment. And they tried to take him off the map by murdering him. And they also tried to take him off the map by indicting him in every jurisdiction in the country for all kinds of shenanigan crimes, including what Letitia James brought against him. So if I were Trump, I think I probably would want to do what he's doing. But I don't think that he's doing this for pure human revenge. I think that he has, as we discussed last week, he has this remarkable ability to create a circumstance where the Democrats are forced to take a completely ridiculous position, whether it's defending Antifa or defending, boys competing in women's sports. And in this particular case, he's forced Letitia James to say that it's wrong to weaponize the justice system, which is obviously just a farcical thing to come out of her mouth, because any of us who live in New York certainly can remember when she was running for that office, her entire campaign was based on the idea that she was going to prosecute Donald Trump. So, look, we can perhaps debate whether this particular charge from the DOJ was politically motivated. It probably is, but we can certainly debate that. No, you don't have to debate whether the charges against Trump are politically motivated. She openly said it, but before there was even a case to be made, she said, we're going to get him for something. So I'm torn on this one. I do think that It's probably worthwhile to give the Democrats a taste of their own medicine. But I do hope, as someone who believes in our country and has hope for its longevity, this sort of behavior cannot continue in perpetuity. It needs to stop. So, and I don't know what the mechanism would be for it to stop, but it needs to stop.
And Bob, you spoke to a lot of state lawmakers for the South Shore Press, and your stories are on southshorepress.com. What's the reaction, Bob, from state lawmakers about this?
Yes, I had the opportunity to interview some of our local state legislators, Senator Dean Murray, and pretty much like John said, the shoe is on the other foot. She ran on going after Trump. These legislators are very aware of that. Senator Murray said, yeah, she got elected by saying she's going to get Trump. And now that Trump's the president and he withstood all of the attacks on himself, legally, personally, his family, now they're taking a good look at Letitia James. And this is what they found. They found that in Virginia, she got a mortgage on a home, said she was going to live there, when in fact she lived in New York and she was the attorney general. And then they did point out that, this is going to lead to other things. Is there insurance fraud? What kind of insurance rates did she get on her property? There's also properties she owned in Brooklyn. She got a mortgage on saying it was a 4-unit residential apartment building when it was actually 5. And that makes it different when it comes to a mortgage. But it also makes it different when it comes to, I believe she applied for a hemp loan, which was during the COVID. It's sort of like a bailout, helping out homeowners. So if she helped herself to some hemp money and didn't qualify for it because she misled her application, then that could be another problem. So what I get from legislator Senator Murray, and I spoke to Assemblyman Fitzpatrick, is more to come. Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. The one thing that I read in numerous stories that it is difficult because you have to prove intent. And Letitia James, I read in a New York Times story, is going to basically, the argument is, hey, I let my great niece and nephew live there at no charge. It wasn't a rental property. So there you go. You can't prove intent. But either way, yeah, the old saying, turn around is fair play. Tom, I'm curious. I know, again, you're a sports guy, but you are hardcore into politics. I'd be curious of your thoughts, buddy.
I'm not going to be as eloquent as John. I think I love it. Listen, far too long have there been no consequences. And John put it right. Conservatives are based on a certain set of rules, but those rules have been abused. So many times it's being punched down upon and punched down upon and punched down upon with no consequences, with nothing back. And finally, they have to face the music. Finally, even if she doesn't go to jail, good. I hope her life's a living hell for a little while at least, right? Make sure that she goes through it for a little while, feels the pressure for a little while, because it has to stop. But it's not going to stop because all of a sudden they're going to come to their senses, and it's not going to stop because suddenly they're going to become good people, right? No, they're going to continue to keep doing this until you punch them back in the face. It's a bully, right? And the Democrats have been a bully. They are consistently picking on the conservatives, and it's happened for years with no fear of what can happen back to them. And finally, we live in an age now over the last couple of years where we feel the shift, and the shift is we're not going to take it anymore. You're not going to do that to us. We are going to punch back. And this is one of those punch backs. This is one of those, no. You're not going to get away scot-free. You went after me without anything. I'm going to go after you. And if it amounts to nothing, you now know at least a taste of what I had to go through. It's tit for tat. We're talking about the Bible. It's eye for an eye without actually going to that extreme. And as a supporter of what is right and what is just, I'm glad that finally there is some justice going on. Hey, look, taste this. Taste what we tasted.
Yeah, I think the reconciliation in my mind of the two competing factors of I want us to be principled and this has to stop, but also I support going after Letitia James. The reconciliation of those two concepts in my mind would be that if I think about what are the hypothetical ways that this behavior would stop, because I agree with Tom, they're not simply going to decide to be good people and stop engaging in this behavior. They're not going to do that. So one hypothetical way it could stop is you give them a taste of their medicine, inflict enough pain that they come to the table and say, okay, truce. How about we'll just stop? We'll all agree to stop doing this to each other. Now, but I would say, I mean, it's the old saying: if you're going to shoot at the king, you better not miss. You said maybe it'll come to nothing. One of the things you see, and this is really where, as a principled conservative, you hate to see the weaponization of justice, because in the U.S. of A. versus Tom Barton, the challenge isn't whether it comes to nothing. The challenge is whether you have the financial means to go through the 2 years of litigation that is going to be required. And we've seen this with Santos last week. We talked about this. We've seen this time and time again. And when they came after Trump, unfortunately for them, you had not only a force of nature guy who's just not inclined to ever give up, he also had the financial wherewithal to withstand all this stuff. And the average person, including Letitia James, does not have the financial wherewithal to go through this. She's got a GoFundMe page, I believe, to help her with the legal expenses. And, we'll see. The left is always pretty clever about raising millions of dollars for insane things. But, it's you start thinking about where this goes. And Trump, I think, has said this won't be the end of it. So you've got Comey, now Letitia James. There's been rumors of Schiff and whoever else. These are people who, in the case of Letitia James, she hasn't been in public office long enough to be rich yet. So if she had stuck around a few more years, she'd probably be rich. But, she hasn't been around long enough. This is, again, you imagine the Democrats taking office and bringing some bogus charge against you or me or anybody else. It's just such a train wreck to your life, and that's why it has to stop. You can't have it. It's just if you're in the family, and I happen to know some of the folks in the Trump circle and the kids, and it's just horribly unfair to have your life upended financially and and socially. I hope that I think I'm on the side of supporting this sort of thing for Trump in his particular case. But I hope that it brings an end to this behavior for the country.
John, do you think that in the case of former Governor Andrew Cuomo, I think there was some legislation or a decision where the taxpayers would have to foot some of his legal bills? I wonder if Letitia James is going to try to get the taxpayers to bail her out legally.
Yeah, they actually did. They passed, and it took huge amount of criticism, like basically a legal slush fund, but they didn't say specifically Letitia James. The Democrats were smart enough politically, of course, where they set aside like $10 million so that any public official could basically use that pot of $10 million for legal bills. And it's only assumed that they're going to try and use it for Letitia James.
Now, I had thought that those slush funds were specifically designed to insulate you from charges brought against you for acts that you performed as part of your office, which of course Letitia James is, so Comey, for example, could argue that what he's being accused of was part of his responsibilities running the FBI. Letitia James is, of course, being charged with something that it was completely separate from her office. But it would be an interesting twist to think that we're all, as New York State taxpayers, going to be financing Letitia James's personal criminal litigation.
Yeah, and according to the New York Post, she's saying now that she's not going to tap into that fund. That's what she says now. When that legal bill wraps up to $5-10 million, she might be whistling a different tune.
It's funny, Bob.
And Stefan, it's interesting who her attorney is. Wasn't he Hunter Biden's attorney and the well-known Washington guru that bails out all these people in trouble?
Yeah, he'll be getting a lot richer, to say the least, to say the very least. All right, we're going to go down to national politics, too, because we're going to talk about how the financial markets, because the government shutdown is still going on. It looks like there is no end in sight. So, John, I want to pick your brain. Anything earth-shattering to talk about or changes when it comes to finances and the markets?
Well, I mean, the markets, that's a big question. As it relates to the shutdown, as we discussed last week, the markets, at least for the moment, are taking the view that the shutdown is going to have very little, if any, consequence to the U.S. economy. And I think that's probably the right tact. If this goes on for weeks or months, you start getting into a different story. The president, of course, has started the furloughs, which he had promised a week or two ago. I frankly suspect that those furloughs will become a bargaining chip. The Democrats will ask for those jobs to be returned as part of any compromise at the end of this, and we'll see where that goes. But even that, I don't think is consequential to the U.S. economy in any meaningful way that would affect the markets. The markets as a whole right now, I think there's an old maxim on Wall Street that you shouldn't fight the Fed. And in general, if you look back over the last 20 years, there's a pretty good relationship between the direction of the stock market and what interest rates are doing. The president's been very vocal about his desire for the Fed to lower rates. Powell has been reluctant to engage in that. There's been a very open fight between the president and Chairman Powell on that subject. We've now started, in the most recent meeting, they did cut rates. And what the market is pricing in right now is several more rate cuts over the coming months. And if you thought that you were going to get that and combine that with the president's dereg ambitions, which are well underway, that's a really, really favorable backdrop for the markets. It would be pretty hard to imagine 200 or 300 basis points of rate cuts over the next 18 months in combination with massive deregulation and the markets going down. The only caveat to that would be inflation. So, the inflation would be the counterbalance to all of that. As has been well documented over the last 5 years, we've had a massive spike in inflation caused by a lot of the COVID-related bailouts and the money creation related to those things. Inflation has been coming down for the last 12 months. We're now at a level that probably warrants rate cuts. But that's really the thing that Wall Street's paying attention to, is what happens with inflation. If we get another month, 2-3 months out, rates are coming down. Rates, of course, have a lot to do with home construction and people tapping into home equity lines and putting that money into the market. If you started to see inflation tick back up, that would give the Fed reason to pause or conceivably go in the other direction, and that would take the whole bull market premise off the table. But for the moment, it's a pretty good backdrop. Obviously, if you're paying attention to the markets and you saw what happened last week, the president's tariff policies are something to pay attention to. The president, at about 2 p.m. on Friday of last week, put out a tweet about 100% tariffs on China. And, that's a subject, we could do a whole podcast on the trade dynamic with China. We still have so much of our supply chain based in China. If you thought there was going to be any kind of halt or disruption to U.S. trade with China, it's highly disruptive to the U.S. economy. I can make a strong case for why that would be the best thing for the long-term interest of the United States economy, but would be catastrophic over a short period of time if it were severely disrupted. I think the president has shown that he's reluctant to do that. I think the political implications of such a disruption would be catastrophic for the Republican Party. So I think he's unlikely to do that. But last week, he floated the idea of putting 100% tariffs on China in response to China imposing tariffs on rare earth minerals, which is something that the Chinese government has essentially a monopoly on globally. Those rare earth minerals are very important for semiconductors and missile defense and a variety of other things. We get all of those from China. China knows that. So putting a tariff on rare earths or export restrictions in this case would be super disruptive. And Trump floated the idea of 100% tariff. That needs to be worked out. You see the market is up a lot today because on Sunday afternoon, on its way to broker a Mideast peace deal, the president tweeted that he was going to be more conciliatory with the Chinese government on this tariff situation. He's got another few weeks to deal with the tariff dynamic. So, but that would be the second thing to pay attention to outside of inflation.
But getting back to interest rates, I remember we bought our house 3 years ago, and I'll never forget it. And obviously, the rates were a little higher. Our banker was basically like, "Hey, 2 years, don't worry about it. They're all going to drop like a rock. Refinance, you'll save some big bucks. It's going to be no more than 2 years." And they're still hovering in that same neck of the woods. So, Tom, I know you'd love to refinance, but John, what are your thoughts on that? What are the chances, from your perspective, of that actually happening?
Well, look, the president has been, arguably too forceful. I mean, the Fed's supposed to be independent, right? It's the construct of the Fed is that it has nothing to do with the executive branch. The president's been very forceful about his desire to get rates down. Interest rates are wildly stimulative to the economy. So if you think about mortgage rates going from 6 or 7% to 3%, that is rocket fuel to the economy, which, again, if held in isolation, there's enormous political advantage to the party in power when the economy is ripping. And if you go back, and Stefan, you know this as well as anybody, when you poll people or poll voters around election time, the number one issue in people's minds almost always is the economy. So when the economy is ripping, people like the party in power. If you make a relation to the Banana Republic illustration I said earlier, this is the tool of banana republics. You get people in Latin American countries who give away free money because it's very politically advantageous to folks, and you'll keep getting elected giving people free money, but when inflation hits 1,000,000%, that tends to create a problem for people's ability to buy food. So it works until it doesn't. If you look at interest rates in the United States over the last 100 years, this period that we've all lived in over the last decade is a complete anomaly. Having 2 or 3% interest rates, which is actually high globally, you've had lower rates than that in Europe and parts of Asia. Having a 2% interest rate on your home is unprecedented. But look, to answer your question, the president has been vocal about his desire to get rates back down. It seems like he's gotten the Fed to comply for whatever reason. This is where the furloughs come into play because, as you all probably know, the Fed's dual mandate is maximum employment and price control. So when the economy is creating a lot of jobs, that makes the Fed want to not cut rates. And if the federal government, which is the largest employer in the United States, if the federal government starts firing a bunch of people, suddenly the employment data doesn't look as good. That makes the Fed more likely to cut rates. So the furloughs actually help the president's desire to get rates down. But look, I think at the end of the day, it's a pretty safe bet to say that the Fed is going to cut the rates, and they're going to keep doing that until inflation ticks up. So we have to pay very close attention to that inflation data, and that would be the only thing that stops it. And for the purposes of the markets, again, if I told you nothing else but that in the next 18 months you were going to get 300 basis points of rate cuts, you would want to be long in the stock market in that case, almost assuredly.
Music to the ears of Tom. What do you think, buddy? Refinance that house? I would certainly love to at the rate that I've got right now. Put some extra cash in my pocket. I'll take bread lines. I'll sit in bread lines for 10 years if you can just lower my interest rate.
I'm locked in at 3.5%. I'm loving my interest rate. The problem is I got a 3-bedroom house and I just had a kid, right? So I got to go buy another one, and they're going, yeah, interest rates aren't 3.5% anymore. So it's kind of like holding on to that. I'm going to have to go. I know I'm going to have to make that decision, but I can't do it right now and give up the percentage. But it's getting a little crowded in this house.
Well, and that's the circular loop of the rocket fuel, because you have this backlog of people. There's a natural turnover of housing, right? Because people have children and people get married and people get divorced and, people graduate from college and need houses. There's a natural demand for new housing. But when you have a whole basket of guys who are in their last house at a 3% mortgage, forget you want a bigger house because you have more children than you did a few years ago. The incremental cost of 7% versus 3% is just a non-starter for most people. So when you get this rate cut, the rocket fuel is largely in the form of the increase in house prices, because the market is pretty efficient. So the guy who wants to buy Tom's house but is looking at a 7% mortgage, as we all know, it's on Zillow, right? You go on Zillow and you say, I want to find out what's your budget. Most people think of their budget in terms of what is my monthly mortgage payment. That's my budget. And that number, when the rates are at 7%, the amount of house you can afford is much lower than you can when the rates are at 3%. And that all gets worked out in the price of housing in the United States. So whatever Tom's house is worth today, when rates are at 7%, when rates are at 3%, suddenly not only is Tom inclined to go move, the price of his house is probably 20 or 30% higher than it is right now.
Nice. Well, you mentioned rocket fuel, John, and that's a perfect transition into the sports arena. because rocket fuel makes the Jets go. But in this case, in the New York Jets, Tom, you're shaking your head because they are just so bad. And upcoming shortly, folks, we're going to have a very special guest and special interview with Joe Girardi. We'll be talking Yankees baseball too. But first, before we transition to that, we're going to talk football, the NFL, Tom, the New York Jets. I think the four of us, if we put on a helmet and ran onto a field, could actually beat the New York Jets. I mean, can you get any lower, Tom, than where they are right now?
I could certainly pass for more than 45 yards in a game, and that's what they passed for yesterday. I mean, it was just a brutal showing. The problem isn't just that they're bad. It's that they continuously try to put Band-Aids on fixing things. And I'm one of the components of, look, you don't want to be in the middle, right? If you're going to be bad, be all the way bad. All right? If you can't win a Super Bowl, be the worst team in the league, burn it down and start over. And the New York Jets just have never been able to get that in themselves. Never been able to say, okay, we're going to do everything different. You know, you bring in Aaron Glenn, who's a defensive coordinator, but you bring in a recast, and I like Justin Fields, but he needs a certain kind of thing around him, which is offensive weapons. They don't have that. He needs an offensive coordinator. They don't have that. So they got a good defensive coordinator who's going to play the game a certain way, but he doesn't have the personnel to do it. And it goes back to the Bill Parcells, mentality when he was talking about being a GM, and he said, if I'm going to bake the cake, if I'm going to bake, the cake, let me go shop for the groceries or something of the variance of that, which makes sense. Look, Aaron Glenn comes in, he's a defensive coordinator, and they go, by the way, Justin Fields is now your quarterback. You mean the guy that the Bears said that it wasn't going to be a quarterback? Okay. The guy that the Pittsburgh Steelers said wasn't going to be a quarterback? All right, cool. What else you got for me? Well, Garrett Wilson's still on the roster. All right, well, what about second? No, we don't have a second receiver. Oh, okay. What about linemen? No, we're not bringing anybody up. All right, what about running backs? We got the guys that we hear over last year. So the offense is basically exactly the same, and you're bringing a defensive coordinator and you think things are going to change. The Jets need a complete and utter rehaul. Be 0-18, 0-17, lose every single game, lose them historically bad, and maybe somebody there will wake up and say, okay, let's press the reset button, be historically bad for 2 or 3 years, but then we're going to be able to build a team. While you're in this middle ground, retread quarterbacks, retread linemen, different wide receivers that wouldn't even be on other teams. When you're in this kind of middle ground, you're never going to improve. And that's where the New York Jets have been for decades, it seems.
Oh, they are. You say be bad and be bad, but they are. I mean, it's painful. Again, I'm a Bills fan. I make no bones about that. And I think, the Patriots, obviously they're a little better team this year. Patriots beat the Bills this year, of course, at home. But I just think like anyone in the AFC East, you can win that division at 7-9. I mean, Miami is just a total dumpster fire. The Jets are a massive dumpster fire, Tom. I mean, at least, again, you are a nationally known betting expert. Is there any value for people in betting the Jets either way, good, bad, or indifferent?
Yeah, the unders basically at this point. I mean, Jets covered yesterday against Denver. So Denver's a really good team. Jets were able to keep the game relatively close. Jets coming in at 7.5-point underdogs. In the betting world, Stephanie, it's about perception. Everybody knows the Jets stink, right? The Jets are absolutely terrible. So their numbers are going to be inflated a little bit, and their numbers are going to be pumped up a little bit. What angle can you take here? Prop plays, betting on the unders for passing yards. Garrett Wilson's going to be out. But again, the market knows these things. The Jets unders still have a little bit of value. You can still make a couple of bucks on the Jets unders. But right now, the Jets are just the stay away team. If it's that ugly, you want to stay away until the public gets to a point like Cincinnati was yesterday. The whole public said Cincinnati's the worst team on earth. They're the most miserable team in the league. 14.5-point underdogs to Green Bay. And they wound up covering. Didn't win. They wound up covering, right? Once the market, as using a John terminology, right? Once the market kind of overreacts, that's when you can bet the Jets. Right now, the Jets are actually a decent bet on because people think that they stink so much, which we'll see how long that could last.
And last question before we go to the Yankees. Tom, there's a Miller Place runner, high school, who did very well at a recent 5K. Can you share that story that's also seen in the print edition of the South Shore Press and at southshorepress.com?
Yeah, I really think it's a great story. Even if the kid, I don't want to put him down in any way, shape, or form. Even if he doesn't even understand the the levity of it. Okay, to run in a tunnel to towers for 9/11 and all that means in New York, to win it at his age from Long Island, which has such big ties to 9/11 and a remembrance of that. The idea that you could go at his age and win it is historically just fantastic in one breath. But Stefan, just the concept of, wow, does he even realize what he really just won, right? And how much it meant to his family members, the Miller Place community itself, and really Suffolk County itself. That's a sense of pride that we don't get here in Long Island all that often. We are towns instead of being, okay, we're all Suffolk all the time. But something like this unifies you and you go, yeah, we're all proud of him because that's us, and it meant for a cause that really, really, really was something that is a heartfelt cause.
Awesome. Now let's turn to something that broke John, your heart, Tom, your heart. I'm indifferent. I'm not a Yankees fan. I don't know about you, Bob, but John, I know you are a diehard Yankees fan. Same. Tom, with you guys. Any thoughts on how the season ended?
You want to go first here, John?
Yeah, there's silence right there on that question.
Yeah, I mean, look, baseball is a huge part of my family and with the kids, and was a huge part of my childhood with my extended family. And so it's something that we pay very close attention to, and certainly during this time of the year is a big area of focus for us. And by the way, that's a beautiful thing. I was texting Joe Girardi's going to come on here in a moment, and I was texting with him about I went to the two home games or the last two home games this week, and it was a game 4. Judge hit the home run and tied the game. We were down 6-1, elimination game, and they come back and it was game 3, and they win that game. And it was the full cycle human experience as an adult sports fan. I'm sure we've all experienced the thing. When I was 15 years old, I watched every single game and lived and died reading the box scores in the newspaper every day. And as you get to be an adult, you often ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? I think it was Jerry Seinfeld did the whole bit about you're really just rooting for laundry because you hate Wade Boggs one day, and then the next day you love Wade Boggs because he's wearing a different shirt. And as an adult, and you process that, you're like, yeah, what the hell am I doing? Why am I rooting for these guys? The Yankees don't care about me. Why do I care so much about them? And I had that full experience at game 3. We're season ticket holders. Season tickets are not cheap. As a family, we invest a lot of time and energy into the Yankees. And they take you through this long 162 game season. And then you get into the Blue Jays. We're down 2-0, elimination game. We're down 6-1 in the 3rd or 4th inning. It looks like the thing's about to be over. People around us are talking about leaving. And in my mind, now I'm there with my son, so I'm trying to put on a happy face because I know that he loves the game and loves the team. But I'm thinking to myself, gee, what the hell am I doing? Like, it's such a waste of my money. It's a waste of my time. I should just take my son fishing. This is ridiculous. But then you go through this thing. They have this ferocious comeback. Judge hits the home run. And the subplot of the series, of course, had been that Aaron Judge, who's obviously a Hall of Famer and one of the best players of our lifetime for sure, has struggled terribly in the playoffs. It has clearly been a mental thing for him. It was clearly pressing in the playoffs for the last few years. And for him to hit that home run was just an enormous positive moment for the fans. And I turned to my son at that moment, who, and he's old, he's 15, so he's old enough to understand all of that. And I turned to my son, and he had tears in his eyes. And, for a 15-year-old kid, he's crying because Aaron Judge hit a home run. And that was the answer, the full circle. That's why we spend so much time with this, right? It's for those moments. It's not, at this point of my life, I shouldn't say I don't care whether the Yankees win, but I told people in my office the next day that moment with my son, I said I didn't care if they won or lost anymore. That was worth the price of admission for the season, and that is why we as adults spend the time and energy that we do on pro sports, I think. What are your thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, he was crying, but it wasn't tears of joy.
No, I go the other way. while I was really happy about the Judge thing, and I really, really was, they may as well finish in dead last place. The Yankees, awful season, horrendous, terrible, and everything is garbage. It's pure garbage. That's where this team is. That is it. The New York Yankees have gotten to a point where you should finish in dead last place. How are you getting beat by the likes of Toronto in these situations? And it's the same thing. It's funny. John used an analogy. I used this analogy on my Fox Sports show. And I said, being a Yankee fan is like I'm with my 1-year-old, where you look at him and you go, I love you so much. You're so adorable. Oh, look at that. He did something so great and it's so amazing. And then the next thing, he's swimming in the dog bowl. You're like, why would you do that? What are you doing? I can't do this. Screaming and crying and keeping you up all night. And you're like, oh, this is terrible. But you still love them. I'm still loving the Yankees. I'm going to bash them. I'm going to rip them. I'm going to have problems with managing. I'm going to have problems with all of the things that they do. And I'm still going to love them forever because they are the New York Yankees. And it's funny, John said, you root for the laundry. You do, and you get personally attached to these people. You feel for Aaron Judge, a guy that's making more money than I'll ever see in my life, right? I'm struggling to make ends meet. This guy's, out there, bathing in $1,000 bottles of Dom Perignon. He doesn't care about me, but I feel for him. I wanted that moment for him. I love the Yankees, but I'm at a point where enough is enough. We are the New York Yankees. Number 2 is the first loser, as George used to say, right? You were the first loser. Enough of this okay attitude, of this, well, we made it to the playoffs and everything's going to be okay. No, be the killer. Go out there, do everything it takes and stop at nothing to get a W. And Hal hasn't been able to do that. This incarnation has not been able to do that. And the New York Yankees may as well finish dead last if this is going to be your playoff exit every year.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I mean, it's just on a pure baseball level, it's fascinating to see the teams that are advancing now, right? You look at the Blue Jays, you look at the lineup of the Blue Jays, and how many times does a guy come up and you're like, who the hell is this guy? I've never even heard of this guy. But with this guy, Ernie Clement, killed us in the Blue Jays series. Never even heard of this guy before, and the guy's like 10 for 13 in the series. And this goes to roster construction, all the things that have been talked about for the last week in New York sports, all of us around the dinner table and with our friends and in sports media, the roster construction, some of the decisions that have been made, the culture of the team, and we'll talk to Joe about these things. But we deserve to lose to the Blue Jays and here's Joe right now.
And there he is.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We got you perfectly.
You came on at the right time because we were just getting into the Yankees, and I'm sure you've heard all the the frustration from the Yankees fans, and you're in a unique position to be able to shed some light on it. Let's just start. What are your thoughts on the season and how things went in the playoffs?
Well, I think for the season, with all the injuries they had to their pitching staff early on in the rotation, I think there was a lot of questions on what was going to happen and who was going to pitch. And I think there were some real pleasant surprises with Cam Schlittler and Will Warren in the job they did. And I think that's really important moving forward. And whenever you can develop starting pitchers within your organization, it can save you a lot of money and really go out and get the pieces that you need. So I think from that standpoint, it was a really good season. I think they made really good moves at the end at the trade deadline that really balanced their roster a lot better. And that's why you saw them take off and they played a lot better. And I know the schedule wasn't really tough at times, but you look at the stretch when they played what was considered the 4 playoff teams. They had a 12-game stretch and they went 7-5. So that was really good. I just think for whatever reason, Toronto was a bad matchup for them this year. And I think sometimes the shorter the series, it's advantaged the team that doesn't have as much starting pitching. And I think that was Toronto. Like, had this been a 7-game series, I think the Yankees probably would have fared better. I can't say that for sure, and I don't want to take anything against Toronto because they're a really good team. But I think Toronto's rotation is susceptible to a long series. And they lost yesterday, and that's really difficult. You're relying on a rookie And then who starts for him in game 3?
Yeah, let me ask you. The thing we were just talking about is just roster construction, because the thing I found myself doing during the Blue Jays series repeatedly is that some guy would come up and I say, "Who the heck is this guy? I've never even heard of this guy." But every dude is a tough at bat. Every guy is a tough at bat. And the Yankees, when I look at the roster, I wonder to myself, yeah, on a 162 game season where more than half the games are going to be against bad teams with bad pitching, and we're going to hit a ton of home runs. Do we have the tough at bat? But then I have looked at the free agents that are coming up this winter, and I say, how do you even identify those guys? Is that a culture thing, the tough at bats, or is that the player is a guy? You look at an Ernie Clement, as a guy we were just talking about before he hopped on. It's like, never even heard of that guy before, and we couldn't get that dude out.
Well, I think it's a philosophy that they teach throughout the minor leagues. And when they get there, they're prepared to grind out at bats and put tough at bats on people. And I think the Yankees have shifted more towards the home run hitting teams. Because if you looked, I think it was like in the last 5 or 6 years, teams that had out-homered the other team in the playoffs went like 95-20.
Right.
But what they don't include in that stat is, okay, but how many opportunities did they have with runners in scoring position, and what did they do? They just pull one single piece. And I think you can get caught up in that. And a lot of times, the top 2 or 3 pitchers don't give up a lot of home runs, and it becomes more difficult. And you think about in the playoffs, teams usually add pitchers at the trade deadline that make their bullpen stronger, like a Louis Varland. I mean, they add guys like that. And it just becomes more difficult to me. And you know, Toronto has done this the whole year. They've worn teams out. They've grinded out at bats. And those were the teams that we had in the 90s.
Right.
I felt like that was the team that I had in 2009. But it's just shifted a little bit. And sometimes it's just the players you have. And I think a lot of times it's a copycat league. I think teams will start preaching more like we need to be better at putting the ball in play. And I think we're starting to see that some. And there was a streak, John, from like 2018 to 2022. The teams that struck out the least and struck out the most were the most successful teams. And now it's changed a little bit. That's not necessarily the case. But so everyone tried to copycat that. And now teams make adjustments. And Toronto has figured out a way to adjust and win their way.
Joe, you know, you mentioned that it's a copycat league, and sometimes to the negative of a copycat league. We saw that a lot of the critics jumped on Aaron Boone for taking Max Fried out after 7 1/3. But then we watched Tarek Skubal get taken out after 99 pitches. Now, it didn't hurt Detroit overall, but you start to get into that position where the fans are sitting at home screaming, why are you taking this guy out just because that 100-pitch plateau? As a manager that has been in that spot, do you have that number that you won't let them get past? Do you have somebody from above telling you, hey, don't let him go past this? Or is it strictly just a gut feeling that everybody's like, look, 100 pitches and that's that?
For me, it was about 115. And you tried to limit that a lot of times. You didn't want him going 115 all the time. But sometimes, because of day off in the playoffs, you're pretty well rested. I look at Tarek Skubal. Tarek Skubal had a hard 95 pitches. It wasn't like 8 innings, right? And I think you have to look at the stress pitches and the amount of pitches they're throwing per inning. You know, did they have a really long first inning where they threw 37 pitches, and that wears the guy out a lot? But I think too many times we just say, okay, that's the number, or I'm not letting him go through the lineup the third time. Some of the greatest advice I ever got from Don Zimmer was watch the swings. The swings will tell you when a pitcher's done. So if he breezes through the lineup the first time, the second time you're starting to see a lot more foul balls, extended at bats, you know that he's getting close to the end. But the other thing, though, that I think sometimes we lose in this is when you start using pitchers 4 or 5 times in a 7-game series, guess what? They're no surprise to the other team either. So if my starter's rolling like Kevin Gausman, I'm leaving in. And what surprised me was, if you look at Polanco, the last 3 years, he's hit left-handers much better than right-handers, and he flipped him around to the right side. So it kind of shocked me, the move, and it ended up hurting them. It ended up scoring another run, which happened to be the winning run, and put them up 2-1. So I think you have to be sometimes careful how many times a team sees your reliever as well, because they become used to that. And the second time I see a reliever, I'm much more comfortable than the first time, and the third time I'm really comfortable. And I think teams sometimes make that mistake.
Joe, let me ask you. So Aaron Boone's come under a lot of criticism for last week. And I know you're friends with all these guys, so I'm not going to put you in a tough spot. But part of the debate I've been having with friends of mine is, what is the role of the manager? And you think about it in three buckets. You have lineup creation, in-game moves, and then culture. Are kind of the three ways that you can impact the team as a manager. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on those things. And if we go in reverse order, from a culture standpoint, I mean, so much has changed, since you were a player to today. Where social media, these guys are now, there's more of a me thing going on with the fancy cleats and the gloves, and now the Yankees have beards and the bat flips and all this stuff that just wasn't around in the 80s. As a manager, how much, if you found yourself in a clubhouse with some more flamboyant guys, how much control of the culture does the manager have, or do you lean more on your star players? I mean, I've been friends with some guys who run basketball teams, and I've been told by guys, look, the culture of the team is defined by the superstars, and there's not much I can do. Tom and I both coach Little League. If a kid shows up to Little League practice with his Bruce Bolts and bat flips, which these kids often do, you can bench the kid and control that stuff pretty well. It's hard to bench a guy making $25 million a year. So how much control does the manager have?
Yeah, that's interesting, because that guy that's making $25 million a year is probably helping the manager win games.
Yeah.
And you're based on wins and losses. I mean, that's the bottom line. But I think you can put your finger on the culture easily. And I think the best run clubhouse is a clubhouse that's run by the players. Mm-hmm. They understand what your vision is, and they carry it out. And, as far as players being flamboyant and some of the bat flips, as long as it's not detrimental to the team, I don't have a problem. Be yourself. We go back to the days that we played, and David Wells, he was a little out there. and there were some things that he did, you were like, whoa. But it didn't hurt the team. He was prepared to pitch on his days. He did his job, and that's the most important thing, because I always said if you had a clubhouse of 26 guys like me, it'd be a really, really boring clubhouse, right? It would be all work, no play, no fun, and that sort of thing. So I think you have to allow the players to be themselves, but you want the players to understand the vision. And if you care about them, they will care about your vision. Have them run the clubhouse. And I think the Yankees do a pretty good job of that. I think Aaron Judge kind of sets the tone of that clubhouse. And I think guys pretty much follow his tone. And there's some players that are a little flamboyant, but I don't have a problem with that. Like even for Jazz Chisholm, right? When his home runs, I'm curious to what he's going to do. I want to see what he does this time, right? And so I'm okay with that.
Now, in an instance, we could look at the Yankees. There's been a lot of scrutiny this year, maybe last year, on some of the bonehead plays, which, as a fan, I probably feel it more painfully than the average casual observer. But if you go back to your time as a player, or even when you manage the Yankees, you get a guy makes a bonehead play, big mental error, costs you in a spot. Who sits down that guy? Is it the Jeters sit him down and straighten him out, or do you call a team meeting as the manager? How does that usually get addressed? Is it more the manager or the players?
Well, a lot of times it will be the position coach or the pitching coach if it's a bonehead play, and you'll have them talk. Sometimes it will be the manager. You'll talk to the players, and I think it's always important you ask what they were thinking, so they take accountability for their actions, and maybe their thought wasn't a bad thought process. They just got out executed by the other side. But and a lot of times it will be a veteran guy that'll go put his arm around a young guy and say, hey, look, this is how we do it, or I've made that mistake before. Just don't let it happen again. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that can be covered. But when players support players, it means a lot. And as long as the player understands that his coaches and his managers have his back, and a lot of times people don't understand that publicly we won't criticize a player, but we'll get on them behind closed doors, because who likes to publicly be humiliated? Nobody. So you just don't do it, and you just try to pick the right time to do it, where it doesn't affect him in a negative way, where he doesn't hang his head. He goes out and produces, but he learns from his mistake.
And what about, so let's go to lineup creation. How much of that these days, obviously in the post Moneyball era, how much of the lineup is being set by guys above the manager, if at all? Is that, how much controls the manager have?
I'm going to say some clubs probably have more influence than others. And I think it really comes down to the manager being comfortable with what he comes up with, and maybe what people up above him come up with, and maybe using a combination of both. I know for me, I would ask, when I had Schwarber and Harper in Philadelphia, ideally you'd like to put two right-handers in between them. And how do you do that? Harper wanted to hit third, so it becomes very difficult, because Schwarber, you wanted to get a lot of at bats. So I had him do like 4 different lineups. And the difference in the 4 different lineups was like somewhere between 1 and 2 runs the whole year. And the only thing that I think of with lineup construction is make it harder for the manager to deploy his relievers that he wants. And that's the most important thing. And I also think when you put a lineup together, you're trying to beat the starter. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to try to beat the 8th inning guy and the 9th inning guy, and that's how I'm going to put my lineup. I'm trying to beat the starter. So I think that you're looking for ideas. I know there were times I would ask, because I would be frustrated with the way our lineup was producing. And sometimes that's just the slump that you're going through. And I would ask, do we shake it up? And there were times, the media would ask me, and I'm like, okay, why don't you put someone else hitting first? I said, who would you like? Well, I don't know. Well, so then why am I going to move the guy if we don't really have an answer? You have to have answers for the questions, and sometimes you just don't.
My question to you is, how much has it changed since then? Because for the fans that get angry and the media that also gets angry, the word analytics has almost become a dirty word. Back then, if I said that to Joe Girardi back then, I think you're going to have a completely different answer than you did when you were a manager, and then maybe now. Has it evolved to a point where analytics is kind of ruining baseball?
Well, I look at it this way. We used to make decisions on the probability of something happening. We did it back then too. We just didn't have as much available as we do today, right? We had matchups. We had pitches that hitters hit. We had counts that they hit them. We had what they did with runners in scoring position. Were they more aggressive? Were they less aggressive? We had all that, but there's just a lot more that players, to me, can learn their own abilities better than we could. So when I think of analytics, I don't think about it so much in managing a game as much as it's a process to improve the players, to increase their spin rate, to increase their velocity, to increase maybe the time it takes them to get the bat from where they're holding it to the contact point. It's more of those things, trying to get the ball in the air, because I had a hitting coach back in the early 2000s. His name was Jeff Pentland. And he used to say, back leg goes down, ball goes up. Now, he didn't say that hit home runs, but he knew that when you got the ball in the air, there was a chance of more damage. So it's not like it hasn't been around. It's just evolved more, and it's just more tools you can use to try to improve players and to manage a game. I mean, I was called Binder Joe when I took over in 2008, if you remember, and they thought I was way too analytical. And now they probably say I'm not analytical enough, but I would disagree with them.
Joe, if I can put you on the spot for 1 second. Game 1 against the Red Sox, you sitting Jazz and Ben Rice, or are you playing the lefty righty?
That's a hard question. I went out to get the righties, and Wells had more success. I think, Ben Rice is a really good player, and I think he's going to continue to improve. But the one thing that I always wanted during the playoffs was my best defensive catcher, the catcher that understood the most. Because in close games, you can't make little mistakes. And I think that when it comes to these tight games, I want defenders in there, because you can't make mistakes.
Right. So Joe, before we let you go, if you're running the Yankees right now, as you pointed out, I mean the core is pretty good, and we have some good young guys.
Yes.
If we think Cole can come back next year healthy, which hopefully he will, I mean that's about it. And you put Schlittler now in the 4 spot, that's about as good a rotation as there is in baseball. We hold on to some of these relievers. The bullpen, at least on paper, looks very solid, and you go around the position players, and there's not too many holes with the exception of we have McMahon, and and I'm curious your thoughts on Volpe. What tweaks would you be looking to make in the offseason?
I think adding a left-handed reliever that has a big breaking ball would be something that I would go after to combat some of these left-handers and make it more difficult for the opposing manager, knowing that, oh, he's got that guy down there. I got to be careful where I put my lefties, because the Yankees had one lefty, and so you don't worry about stacking your lineup with lefties. That's a problem to me. Number 2, I think they're going to have to address some outfield problems because Bellinger's a free agent, Grisham's a free agent, and they're going to have to either try to re-sign, Bellinger, or I think Jason Dominguez is probably going to get a chance to play every day, and I think
Kyle
that's
Tucker.
probably a good thing. Kyle Tucker, yeah. But Bellinger's a lot less expensive as a free agent, and you can probably do some other things. And I think they're going to have to address, what they do possibly, with like Volpe. It seemed that when he got the shot, for 2 weeks he was pretty good.
Yeah.
Offensively. So does he have to have shoulder surgery to repair that labrum? Is he going to be out for a while? And I would like to see possibly a right-handed hitting catcher. So Wells doesn't have to face all the tough left-handers because that's what he had to do this year. And that makes it tough on him. But I don't necessarily think there's a ton to do. I think they do have a pretty good core. Just some little pieces they need to sprinkle in. And I think an outfielder is really, really big. And I think one more good platoon bat that can either play the outfield or the infield, a right-handed hitter, is really important.
All right, and Joe, last thing before you go, what are your thoughts from here? We got 4 teams left. Are you still doing Fox? Or are you done broadcasting?
No, I'm done. I have the Dodgers in Seattle playing.
Yeah.
In the playoffs, and I'm going to go with the Dodgers because of their experience. And I love Milwaukee's like Toronto, and I love Milwaukee's team, but I think we've seen the Dodgers shore up their bullpen by using some of their starters that didn't pitch a whole lot. The emergence of Sasaki down there, I just like their experience and what they're able to do. And I like Seattle's pitching over Toronto, and I think in the end, the injuries that Toronto's had is going to hurt them.
And I will say, just last thought is I was talking to these guys before you hopped on about my experience at Game 3 and my son crying. You and I talked about this the other day when Judge hit the home run, and that's just a beautiful part of the game. My head tells me Dodgers, but I don't know if you guys caught the when Seattle knocked out Detroit the other day. There was an image of a fan, an adult man, in the stands in Seattle, weeping uncontrollably, and it's just a beautiful thing for a good baseball town that's never even been there before. I hope they get there.
My mom was the youngest of 15, and she grew up on a farm, and they basically design their day around when they can listen to the game on the radio in the tractor or come home and watch it at night. And I never looked at it that way, but I started to understand it because you think about it. We look forward every day to the ball game and what's going to happen. And it's so important to people's lives. And that's what I love about my dad gave me the experiences that you're giving your sons and their baseball team. Now, the Cubs did not go to the playoffs. So I didn't get to do that, but I at least got to go to the ballpark and eat Ron Santo pizza, see my favorite player, Ron Santo and Jose Cardinal. And I'll never forget those days with my father.
Yeah, that's special. That's special. And look, and I've told my son, I grew up in pre-free agency Yankee fandom, which in retrospect was a real blessing because in the 80s, the Yankees were not good. And that made 96. I remember my whole family weeping when you guys won in 96. And our kids growing up as Yankee fans, and you look in, even being in the stadium the other night, with the fans booing, and you can feel the fans now have been taught that we are supposed to win, and in part
Yes.
because Jeter and all of you guys, set that expectation. Hey, anything short of a World Series is a failure, which of course you can appreciate as a player. It's not great for the fans to adopt that mentality. You look at a year like this, and look, we got knocked out in the second round of the playoffs. Like in most markets, that would be considered a success. And when you look at what's happening in Milwaukee and Seattle this year, just the joy in those families and what that means to them, that's a special thing. I love that about baseball.
And even Toronto to that. I mean, it is special. And I think I think a lot of people were predicting doom and gloom when Garrett Cole went down in spring training. And look at all the excitement the Yankees, gave the fans. And believe me, I was part of that mentality. If we didn't win, it was considered a failure, and that's hard. But that edge the fans give you is really an advantage for Yankee players because they keep you on your toes. There's an expectation every day. They provide you energy every day. Every time you go on the road, there's a ton of Yankee fans. You're blessed and fortunate to be a Yankee because you're always followed, and they give you energy.
All right, so we're going to keep Tom being super critical of the Yankees just to keep everyone on their toes then.
Yeah.
Before you came on, I said you either finish it dead last or you win it all. There's no in between. That's it. I'm the dangerous fan that John talks about.
Yeah, but tell me, Tom, were there a lot of days that you were really happy this year?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what if you would have won 41 games?
Yeah, 100%.
You can be miserable.
I think it's the Yankee mentality, which is a good thing. I like other sports teams that will never win, but it's the Yankee mentality. We're the Yankees. We're supposed to win. And like John said, it's because you guys put that in me. I didn't do it. I grew up in the Mattingly years, right? It's you guys that put that in me, which is a good thing.
The Yankees always had the highest payroll.
Yeah.
That is not the case anymore. They're either third or fourth, and it's different. I mean, some of these other teams have exploded in payroll, and the highest payroll doesn't guarantee you win, but it usually gets you to the playoffs and gives you a pretty darn good chance. And you can overcome injuries where if you're in a small market, you can't.
Unless you're the Mets.
Yeah.
All right, well, Joe, hey, thanks so much for coming on, man. We really appreciate you.
What a great way to end the show for John Taylor, Robert Charduk, Tom Barton, and the Yankee great, Joe Girardi. Thanks for joining us.